I swear, covering anime when you aren't a weeb is like saying Bloody Mary in the bathroom mirror. If you're negative, you're gonna have the screeching of 1,000 illiterate fucksticks descend upon you like a horde of sweaty, unwashed, transphobic bats. And if you're positive, you're gonna have 100 different shows recommended to you, ranging from the understandable to the downright deranged. I have a rule about not taking recommendations. You see, when I was 11, my brother and his friends made me play a really sad visual novel about a girl dying of kidney failure, and ever since then, I've had trust issues. It's also why I have a rule about going into everything pre-spoiled. In general, recommendations are sought for affirmation first and foremost, and as the average schmuck in the YouTube comment section knows about as much about your taste as they do their own. Like, I don't really care for shonen, and oftentimes people in the comment section come to the conclusion that I just haven't found the right one to get me into it. But shonen has been around in North America since I was 3 years old. I've seen plenty of it. I just don't like it. You know what I do like though? Old shit. You ever actually sit down to watch Princess Night? Or Astro Boy? They're a trip, I tell you what. Hell, I started watching Princess Tutu recently just because one of my friends adores it, and I absolutely adore them to the point I consider them family, so I want to join in the things they like.
And on top of that, I'm always too hasty. Like PK and Lily say I talk like a duck, so I'm weird. I mean, don't you think I'm weird? Shoot, even I think I'm weird.
I don't.
Huh? You don't think I'm weird?
I don't.
I can't believe it. No one's ever said that to me.
Oh no, she's cringe. This is perfect. See, these days when it comes to anime, I usually trust the recommendations of people close to me who could immediately tell me if something will be up my alley. At least I assume that's why I keep 3 weebs around. And failing that, I have a friend in Okinawa who will warn me if someone's trying to sneak in something fucky under the radar. Which brings me to today's subject, because after being recommended Delicious in Dungeon, ostensibly a show about making a cookbook out of a dungeon bestiary, the first thing I did was consult her about it, and she warned me that not only did it have a typical grand fantasy plot hiding underneath, but also that the biggest roadblock to enjoying the show is the main protagonist is an extremely acquired taste. Armed with this knowledge, I boldly ventured into Delicious in Dungeon, and when I emerged on the other side, I went, well, that was certainly one of the shows of all time. Delicious in Dungeon is a comedy, drama, slice of life, fantasy, horror, action series. No, you did not just read that wrong. About a pair of adventurers in a fantasy world, very loosely inspired by Baldur's Gate, exploring a dungeon that's a cross between Purgatory and the Backrooms. The show starts after the entire group wipes to a dragon several floors down because their tank was busy thinking about pies while his party was getting slapped around and boiled alive.
There was a mistake on our map, so we wasted a day getting here. Then we lost 3 days of food in a trap we fell into. After we slay this dragon, we'll have to go back for more supplies.
But before they can all become dragon food, his sister Fallon sacrifices herself to get the rest of them out of the dungeon, whereupon 2 of the party immediately says, fuck this shit, and G quits. You could just feel the love in this group already. Now faced with the notion of having to get back to Fallon before she completely breaks down in the dragon's stomach, her 3 remaining friends boldly mosey back into the dungeon with all the urgency of a leisurely stroll down the street. Yeah, this show has just a teeny, tiny, little, gaping tonal problem. Without the money to buy supplies, they decide the best idea would be to cook and eat the monsters they kill inside the dungeon, leading to wacky hijinks. The comedy of Delicious in Dungeon is mostly reaction-based. Either a character has a comical overreaction to something, a comical underreaction to something, or has the completely wrong reaction to something. You mean a comical wrong reaction, right, Lil? If I'd meant that, I would have said it. That having been said, if you were expecting a goofy comedy about cooking monster food, you should be aware that the comedy has to split a timeshare with a pretty generic adventure fantasy plot, and neither of them could really agree on a timetable, so the tone jerks back and forth so abruptly between comedy and drama, you might think you sat on the remote and skipped to the next episode. Just to use the rescue of Fallon as an example, the tone pings back and forth between silly scenes of reassembling bones and characters having goofy, awkward scenes with Fallon, and dramatic, nightmarish rituals of blood and tearing flesh 7 times in 10 minutes. Almost makes you wish TV shows had a way to section off and isolate these things from each other, so a silly comedy plot doesn't have to share the same space with a drama plot. We could call it an episode, but I'm just talking crazy again. McKay, get my meds, I'm hearing the voices. Most of the show's tonal issues actually come from the main character, Laios, who reacts to his sister needing to be rescued like Eeyore's resigning himself to the day's misfortune, but the moment an edible monster shows up, it's like someone's whacked him in the tailbone with a cattle prod.
Saving my poor sister is the only thing on my mind.
Sure it is.
There's a profound absence of tension with Laios, given the weight of the situation he and the group have found themselves in. Sure, they can't just no-clip through the dungeon floors and have to take the long way down where Fallon is, but the entire time he's on horse tranquilizers, unless the subject ends up being monsters. And there's no way around it. This makes him come off like a fucking asshole. Half the content surrounding him in both the show and the comic is other characters constantly being incensed by his insensitivity, and his near constant sidetracks back to monsters. I got the impression early on that Laios cares more about monsters than about people, and that impression was right because it's later established that because his village was a pack of shitheads to him and his sister, he decided the sensible, level-headed thing to do was to leave the backwards, obsolete rural communities behind and venture off into the civilized world of the urban. He became a jaded misanthrope who, aside from his sibling, has a dim view of people. Actually, actually, wait, let's see. Shitty parents, shitty community, upbeat nihilism, the wrong emotional reactions to absolutely everything, extremely questionable eating habits, and their only primary human connection is their sibling. Well, that sounds familiar. Only kidding. Honestly, Laios reminds me of Pokemon Sun and Moon, where something really intense and dramatic can be happening, and every character is just absolutely losing it while the player character is just standing there astrally projecting. In fact, an even better comparison would be BoJack Horseman, the main character of BoJack Horseman. Oh, you didn't need to know that part. And the entire show's primary theme is that BoJack Horseman fucking sucks and nobody likes him. And I feel the same way about Laios as I do about BoJack. BoJack Horseman does a lot of good moments that use the fact that the character is an unlikable son of a bitch who would rather pity himself than actually improve as a person. But in order to get there, you still have to endure a character who is an unlikable son of a bitch who would rather pity himself than actually improve as a person. And as compelling as such a concept can be, it's also exceptionally painful to get through, and frankly, I can't do it. I can't stand Laios. I find the balance between his inability to match the tone of everyone else in the room and the point where he starts taking things seriously are so wildly out of balance, he just comes off like a dick. When I was discussing this with people, some charming folk with bicycle pumps embedded in their skull screeched at me to read the comic because it proves me wrong about Laios. And I did read the comic and I found two things. One, he's actually worse in the comic because people are putting more pressure on him. There's an especially egregious example when Fallon makes her second appearance having been turned into a giant rubber chicken dragon, and Laios looks upon the way his sister has been twisted and violated and says,
It's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Okay, this fucking guy. In the show, his next line involves him wondering if Fallon got too greedy with the amount of monster she is now, and it just pans over Fallon until Marcel reminds everyone what the appropriate response is. But in the comic when he's saying this, the shot's on him, and Senchi's looking at him like, bro, what the unholy fuck is wrong with you? If that wasn't enough, Laios gets the cosmic hammer coming down on him so many times you'd swear he was any woman in a Blizzard game. Every character is at some point telling him to fuck off and rejoin us all in reality. Deity-like creatures call him out for fantasizing about monsters destroying his entire village, and even his ending involves him just getting fucked. Hey, you hate people and love monsters? Well, now you're the king of people, the dungeon's gone, and monsters are repelled from you. Eat shit, dickhead. This is the part where I end up being vindicated over every bitchy little weeb currently infesting the intellectual void that is Twitter, because Laios consistently refuses to be a better person, and as punishment, he just takes L for the rest of time. Like, that's his lore. But wait, Lily, if this is intentional and he gets fucked, what's your problem? Well, the part where he gets fucked is over 70 chapters into the comic. Ooh. Yeah, that's a long time to have to put up with Laios, and the moment where his character shows redeeming qualities are few and far between. There's a point where Laios tries to justify himself and his attitude on the basis that neglecting his health in the interest of rushing to Fallon's rescue would just be counterproductive. But honestly, I'm not really asking for him to rush himself. By all means, take your time so you do it correctly. What I'm asking for is some actual human tension. The creator of this show is a big fan of Baldur's Gate, and the entire first half of Baldur's Gate 2 is an extended rescue mission to retrieve the player character's sister by building up the goal to fund the rescue and also getting the equipment to survive Spellhole. You can't rush it because you're locked into an entirely linear second act from that point onward. But the tension is maintained through 3 dreams where Imoen haunts the player, and it happens every few rests. And there's even a mod that adds 3 more dreams and complementary conversations with other characters to keep that tension going. At all times, Imoen's central place in the Ballspawn's heart is always reinforced, even if the player is taking the time to go through every side quest. Hell, Imoen isn't in actual serious danger until after you complete this part of the quest. Imoen is so central to the player character that being mean to her is often too evil even for evil players. There's a distinct lack of that kind of anxiety with Laios, and Fallon is supposed to be the one human being he actually gives a shit about. If anything, making him the misanthrope to end all misanthropes works against him even harder, because like, bro, that's your favorite person. I've heard some people suggest that Laios might be autistic. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, because the story makes it clear his monster obsession and his misanthropy are the direct result of growing up in an ignorant backwater hellhole, and regressing so much into his monster obsession he refuses to let go of his adolescent view of humanity, or to accept that people are complicated and maybe your dipshit hometown sucked, but sometimes that's life, loser. And so trying to claim he's autistic coded smacks to me of trying to underwrite all of that. Look, there's an intersection between neurodivergence and the systemic abuse neurodivergent people experience as children that contributes greatly to the whole spectrum part of the autism spectrum. It's not just that autism affects everyone in different ways. Every autistic person has different opinions and beliefs on how to manage it formed by their experiences. Some autistic people grow up thinking neurotypical social conventions are complete horseshit and think, why even bother learning these? They're fucking stupid and we should do away with them. So struggling with social cues isn't even a problem they feel they need to work on at all. Autistic people have all the same nuanced beliefs on their experiences that you primitive neurotypicals do, and this often affects how we approach our autism and how we decide to nurture ourselves. Autism is a spectrum, but it's a spectrum for reasons both psychological and sociological. And the problem I have is that an autistic person's disposition given is often attributed solely to their autism and not to anything else that informs your personality. And not just by neurotypical people and fucking autism moms, autistic people do this as well. A neurotypical person is allowed to be a petulant little antisocial asshole, but if an autistic person does the same thing, people often go, well, that's the tism for you. Laios's autistic traits are hyperfixating on monsters and looking at social cues and going, huh, I wonder who that's for. But he's also such a nihilistic misanthrope that he doesn't really care to address or consider either of those things, which compounds both of those issues. Not least of which being that he's reached the age of 26, still clinging on to an idea about humanity born from being a miserable teenager in an egg-ring backwater hellhole. It's this idea that autism is some kind of personality override rather than a single part of a greater whole that informs your personality that I've always found deeply troubling. You have to be the kind of person who thinks checking an autistic person for being rude and inconsiderate is inherently ableist, and I've never met anyone who sincerely believes that who wasn't the one getting checked and was upset about it. Not to commit a grave mortal sin in the eyes of the inbred hicks that infest Twitter and say something positive about the Big Bang Theory, but one thing I always liked about that show is that the characters are always checking each other without it severely impacting their friendship, showcasing that even in moments where they're cross with each other, they still care about each other enough to want their friends to be the best possible versions of themselves. You can take or leave literally everything else, but that part is something I adore. I've always liked characters with issues who are handling them and dealing with them and working them out. You know, like this guy.
It's not fair for me to depend on you for the rest of my life. At least not as much.
Yuri Breyer is a character with a lot of deep-seated emotional and psychological issues, even more than Laios, most of which are directed at Yor, but he is always trying to make sure that is never Yor's problem to deal with, and I find that commendable. And Laios behaving the way he does in the mid-levels of the dungeon is one thing, but the point where I said, fuck this guy, was when he looked at his sister, saw the way she'd been violated and went, well, that's cool. You compile all the context onto it that you want, it doesn't change the fact that that's a lot. That's a lot for what was supposed to be one of the more lighthearted shows on the market. I know he gets called out on it, but it's still just a lot. I've been doing this job for a long time, and over the years I've encountered characters and even entire works that asked a lot of me of what I'm going to put up with on the promise of payoff later. And I've been able to do that to an extent. It's not often that I just write a character or a work off completely, and usually when I do, it's because they just ask me to put up with too much. Characters who just won't learn their lesson, characters who rely on authorial fiat to succeed, characters who change personalities at the drop of a hat because their writers can't make up their minds, characters who cross the line into just being unpleasant to watch regardless of their place in the story, and characters who just fucking suck, and I'm honestly at my limit. I mentioned earlier I don't take requests, especially regarding anime, but a dirty secret there is that there is a way to get me to watch a given anime, and that is to be someone I love. My wife loves Digimon, and because I love my wife, I watched it with her, powering through the early bits where everything is really awkward, and we eventually came to an episode that really speaks to this particular issue. It's called My Sister's Keeper. In this episode, Kari falls ill while they're in the digital world. They have to find medicine for her. The entire episode is Tai and Izzy trying to find that medicine in a digital city, but the longer Tai goes without success, the more anxious and unstable he becomes, to the point he lashes out at Izzy over it. I actually like that this is so unusual for Tai that Izzy's not even mad. He's just like, the hell's going on? And when he calms down, he has to explain that when he was younger, he almost got Kari killed because he disregarded her health in order to play soccer. And then, well, let me just play it.
But what really kills me is what she said when they brought her home from the hospital. The first words out of her mouth.
Ty, I'm sorry I can't kick the ball very good. You'll probably never want to play with me again.
That's her. That's Kari. She never thinks about herself. It doesn't matter if she feels bad or she's bummed out about other stuff. She's always worried about the other kids. She wouldn't be sick. She'd be just fine if she never came to this stupid place. But she came because she knew that we needed her help. She never thought about what she wanted. She never does.
Because she cares.
She's a kid. I'm her big brother. I'm supposed to look after her and protect her and think of what's best for her. That's what I'm supposed to do.
This one event when he was 8 years old had a deep and profound impact on him, both for good and ill, and throughout this episode he's reliving what is probably his worst memory. It's happening again. Tai is racked by guilt, but also deep and sincere love. I was honestly surprised this was happening in Digimon of all things. The love and adoration between Tai and Kari is the best part of the whole series, and I bring this up because Tai is quite similar to Laios. Singularly focused, impulsive, rash, kind of an asshole at times, hyper-fixated on one or two topics, and with an inflated sense of self-importance. But the thing is that Kari is always the exception. Kari is where Tai shows himself to be responsible, dedicated, loyal, loving, and selfless. And I wish this was a side we got to see of Laios. Hell, I wish this was a side we got to see in siblings at all, because the way people write sibling relationships has been inserting closer and closer to mutual toxicity for a long time. I doubt anyone who likes Laios would argue it would be worse. Some people have argued this all makes sense for the character, but if Laios had been outwardly emotionally invested in Fallon's safety, would any of you have been saying, oh, this is bad, I'd have preferred if he was emotionally numb? The comic is just loaded with moments where Laios keeps pissing other characters off and they keep having to yell at him for his complete obliviousness, and after a while it just gets weird the longer he goes without learning his lesson. All I'm saying is maybe we could take half of these and swap them out with more of,
I'm glad you're safe.
I do genuinely like this moment. The almost manic smile, the very gentle way he hugs Fallon, the soft, delicate whisper of relief, the way he apologizes for making her cold and rushes to get her something to wear. This is great. I love it. I wish we had more of it, not just with Fallon, but with the other characters as well. That's not asking too much, right? If the ratio of Laios' boneheadedness and his sentiment was more balanced, he'd be more bearable. That balance is what makes the difference between Kronk and Zahir. Well, except for,
It's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
but Lily, there's a clear and obvious reason he's like this. So? A lot of crappy characters have reasons they behave the way they do. I'd be hard-pressed to find one that doesn't. Fucking Ashley Graves had a reason for behaving the way she does. It was neglect and social isolation. Does that mean I'm not allowed to call her a shit character now? Actually, viewer, don't answer that question. Modern media critique is so fixated on intent over execution because finding the intent is a lot easier than examining the execution. So as long as someone has a reason they're doing the things they do, people act like that makes them automatically good. I've had my criticisms of a lot of things dismissed on the basis of intent. Whether that intent itself was good or they actually managed to pull that off is ignored because it's too difficult to figure out. And these are often the people who will accuse you of media illiteracy if you commit the mortal sin of disagreeing with them. They're also the same people who scream let people enjoy things when media critique has to exist in their vicinity. The show's quality pretty much lives and dies on Laios. If you like him and are willing to go through his backstory, this show will probably seem like the best show ever made, but if you don't, he's the biggest, most obstructive roadblock to everything you do like. So if you don't like characters like this show is going to be very tedious to watch. The BoJack Horseman comparison works the best. In spite of his flaws, you have to like BoJack Horseman enough to reach the point where BoJack Horseman smacks BoJack Horseman for being BoJack Horseman.
Okay, mommy, Shrek is skipping.
So getting away from Wojak Tallman, let's move on to the other significant character and the one who is actually good. Marcel, the elven mage, because it's always a mage and elven swordswoman would just be absurd apparently, is Fallon's best friend and whose sanity is hanging on by an absolute thread. Unlike Laios, Marcel thinks that eating monsters is disgusting because everything about how she's been taught about safe food makes the idea of eating slime completely anathema to the idea of wanting to live. And so for the first half of the series, she provides most of the comedy, being the only sane woman in a pack of absolute psychopaths. Takes me back to when I was 14 and my girlfriend forced me to eat sushi, and everything I've been taught about safe food up to that point told me that raw meat was bad, and also you're giving it to me, so you probably laced it with poison. Yeah, it was good, but I had to take about 10 minutes to swallow the initial instinct to not eat something I'd been taught to equate with danger. I think a lot of people are often hesitant to try new foods at first, even if they're super open-minded. That first bite's always going to take some mental preparation. Although that having been said, you will never convince me to eat blowfish. I am a terminally unlucky woman. Marcel is the best part of the show. She's a much more grounded person, ironically. And she's actually quite genuinely funny. Furthermore, she's averse to the tone issues Laios drags around with him like a trail of vaguely confused ducklings. She has all the tension and anxiety about Fallon I wish the other characters would, and she actively works on herself throughout the show and grows the most as a person. But granted, she didn't have much competition there. Fallon's absent for most of the story. Chilchuck, I don't actually pay much attention to Chilchuck, honestly. I'm mostly focused on the other two central characters and their mutual motivation. And Laios and self-reflection go together about as well as Israel and other people's territory. At times, Marcel seems to have a much closer bond with Fallon than her own brother does, as she shows Fallon such a level of concern, care, and affection that a lot of people looked at them and went, oh, they're gay as shit.
I don't care if you've grown, you're still a runt in my eyes.
In fact, scenes of Marcel and Fallon in that mandatory anime fan service bath scene got a lot of people believing that they had sapphic tension and probably decided to watch the show for that alone. I know my wife, in the same sapphic blinders that made her watch Arcane, was about to do the same thing before I told her the truth. they aren't. Which I'm fine with, honestly. Give me highly affectionate BFFs, highly affectionate siblings, or highly affectionate romantic couples. Any of them will do. I'm not picky. I don't care how the emotional intimacy happens as long as there's emotional intimacy. And I adore the friendship between Marcel and Fallon. I'm living for how much she cherishes Fallon and the length she's willing to go to in order to rescue her. It was Marcel and her sheer relentless drive to rescue Fallon that made me keep going up until the point that I just had to tap out because I had to make the video, and also I really don't like this show. There's an episode where they run into one of their former party members after Marcel has been drained of her mana, and while Laios is just like, oh hey, small world, Marcel is pissed that they abandoned Fallon like that. And later in the episode, when Laios tries to send her back to the surface because she's injured, the idea of just leaving without Fallon is so crushing to her that she does everything she can to recover without leaving. And if it hasn't become clear yet through every comparison I make in this video, my favorite character motivation has always been and will always be devotion. That Marcel's devotion to her friend is the forefront of her character is the show's saving grace. Every time I said to myself, I've seen enough, Marcel would do something like this and keep me going for a while. Even in the scene where Laios reaches his most unbearable, Marcel ends up being the one to salvage it.
Fallon! Do you recognize who I am?
Marcel, stop it!
Fallon!
Marcel's devotion also does the gold standard for character work of informing both her positive and negative attributes, as it's her desperation to get Fallon back that leads to her using a dark forbidden ritual and accidentally binding her soul to a dragon, which is something Fallon never fully recovers from. Marcel makes foolish, reckless decisions in the pursuit of getting Fallon back, and as a result has to do most of the learning and growing as a character because her actions have direct and unavoidable consequences. Marcel is a reckless woman who makes dangerous decisions, oftentimes more reckless than Laios, but it's always immediately clear why, and is understandable because love makes you do dangerous and reckless things, especially if it's born out of a fear for someone's safety. And it also speaks to Fallon's character as well, because while she's absent for the vast majority of the story, you get the sense of what kind of person Fallon is to inspire that kind of adoration and devotion. If anything, the fact that they aren't gay only makes this more evident. You see the way Marcel behaves and go, wow, Fallon must be someone special. I found myself genuinely liking Fallon as a character in spite of the fact we see very little of her, and what little we do see is just kind of tropey. I mean, she's a soft-spoken priest, she's just very generically nice, she refers to Laios as brother instead of his name. Like, I'm almost positive Fallon was created by opening up Final Fantasy XIV and clicking randomize. But that doesn't matter, because Marcel's affection and concern for Fallon ends up making me adore her character in spite of that. I don't even care that she isn't that deep, because I haven't seen as much of her as Marcel has.
Whoa, hey!
My main issue, however, is that Marcel is often made the butt of the joke. She's the only sane woman in a group consisting of one of the guys from Epic Mealtime, someone they picked up in the LFG channel, and Commander Tuvok, so oftentimes her honestly very reasonable reactions to every weird thing going on in the dungeon comes off like the ramblings of a pampered princess. Hell, one thing I heard in my Discord server is that the reason nobody acts with any sort of urgency toward Fallon is because death isn't permanent here, and that's made everyone jaded. But Marcel rips the sheet off that facade because she's not nearly as jaded as everyone else is. Death might not be permanent, but if the body can't be found or is destroyed, it certainly is, and Marcel knows this, but she's often treated like the one causing most of the problems.
Big bats and giant rats.
I'm not eating unhygienic things.
Forest goblins.
Same with demi-humans.
Living armor?
Metal. That's it? There's nothing normal?
Oh my god, first you say I'm fine with anything, then hate whatever we suggest. You're that type.
Oh my god, Marcel, just be okay with quasi-cannibalism and eating steel. That's the joke, Lily. Oh, was it? My apologies. I was thrown off by the fact that it wasn't funny. I'll do better, I promise. The fact that Marcel is the most likable character in the room and gets crapped on by characters who are in desperate need of therapy, medicine, and a few kicks to the sack for good measure just comes off as weird, honestly. Especially since we've established that the show removes moments where other characters give Laios shit for basically being a freshly born nobody. Oh, you mean an anime is being weird about women, Lil? Excuse me while I alert the fucking media. Yeah, I know, anime and women have long gone together like oil and environmental stability, but there's no reason that has to be the case. I've seen several anime that could treat women like actual people. Who's making this adaptation? You know, on reflection, I should have known that sooner. There's a bleeding, screaming woman ripping her shirt off. Of course it's Trigger. But the way Marcel is treated in general just rubs me the wrong way, especially after Spy Family, where Yor gets to be a fully nuanced character who gets to offer commentary on Cold War-era gender norms, and how she utterly fails to meet them, yet that's what everyone loves about her. Is it perfect? Well, no, but neither is getting a 50 on your final exam. It's still a passing grade. Still, Marcel remains the main draw to even watch the show because she's arguably the main character, and is still quite lovable. If anything, the crap she gets from others just makes her even more more sympathetic. I know I said the show lives and dies on if you can tolerate Laios, but I think you have to significantly dislike him like I do for Marcel to not successfully pick up the slack. And that's where I struggle finding a way to judge Delicious in Dungeon. What about the main plot, Lil? Evil wizard at the bottom of an evil dungeon. Kill him. Look, it's not that deep. The plot just exists to drive all the characters insane, except for the two who already are. Anyway, it's a strange one to grade because it's so reliant on an inherent subjective. Sure, everything is subjective, but a critic can at the very least make an adequate guess on what most people will find enjoyable. It's rare when a base-breaking character like this affects the entire show, but with Laios it could swing either way, so I have to give the show 2 grades based on that. One thing that's worth mentioning is that the fanbase for this show is fucking god-awful. Yeah, I know weebs have always been somewhere between Eric Cartman and the guy from Fight Club in terms of their ability to exist with other people, but fucking hell, this is the second time making this video because the first one was a lot less gentle, and it was like stepping on a wasp's nest as the most feral, angry pack of lunatics did everything short of doxing me in their outrage. It was because of these clowns I went and read the comic, only to find myself vindicated on all my complaints. And these are the same people who claim I have no media literacy. Some of them claimed I was ableist for disliking a character they decided was autistic, and then proceeded to call me a retard multiple times over. So which is it, clown? I know it's odd to point out an unhinged fanbase as a negative, but there are some fanbases who are like next level weird about discourse around their precious baby, like they spent their entire life never having to interact with another human being. So just a heads up, if you watch this show and dislike it, probably best not to say anything, she said at the end of her critical video.
Eat 'em up, eat 'em up, eat 'em up, eat 'em up. Reese's Puffs, Reese's Puffs. Eat 'em up, eat 'em up.